Charlie Tucker joined History Channel's reality television series Mountain Men for its second season, as his love for the woods and his hobby of trapping furs became his way of life. He's a local celebrity in Ashland, Maine, who gained nationwide recognition when he was cast in the hit series by Warm Springs Productions. Early life and family. Not much is known about his family, except that his grandfather used to be a guide in Maine, and his father was a district forest ranger. It was said that he was just a month old when he was flown in to live in the Great North Woods. The log cabin called Camp Tucker Inn that he built with his own hands became a tourist attraction, part of the Caribou Parks and Recreation Department's one-day tour of the North Maine woods. Once visitors reached his place on what was known as Tucker's Turnpike along Jack Mountain Road, they were welcomed by Charlie and Rita Morgan, his companion, and offered refreshments. After a tour of his place, they were treated to homemade bread and chicken soup as they engaged in conversation with Charlie. The series Mountain Men follows the lives of guys who live far from the trappings of modern society and who survive off the land. It started airing in May 2012 with the fur trapper Marty Mayorado in Alaska, subsistence farmer Eustace Conway in North Carolina, and tanner Tom Orr in Montana. Charlie, a fur trapper in Maine, was included in its second season. He worked in the logging industry for 25 years, then gave it all up to follow his dream of living off the land. He knew he wouldn't have the same income, but said that this was where he was at in his life. The series was quite successful, as viewers were most curious about a lifestyle so different from their own, and they were trying to understand what the big deal was when life could be so much more convenient in the 21st century. According to one of its producers, Mark Pierce, there's more independence there, more satisfaction in doing things that make you closer to the land or nature, or foraging a living with your hands. Mark and Chris Richardson of Warm Springs Company said that their team went to far-flung areas and consulted the locals and game wardens in tracking people living off the grid. Their scouts walked into a dollar store in Ashland, Maine to buy a 9-volt battery. When they met retired game warden Jim Drummond, they hired him to help them in their search for men in the area who fitted the requirements for the series. It was Jim who recommended Charlie. When the scouts went to his place to check him out, they found his willpower and stubbornness to be character traits they were looking for, and the producers cast him in the show for his first winter, living the mountain man lifestyle. The production generally sent a 5-man camera crew to live with a mountain man and film his day-to-day activities. They were aware of the danger and experienced the difficulties firsthand. Charlie made a living out of fur trapping in northern Maine, which is said to be the coldest place in the eastern US. He had to rely on his skills and trust in his judgment to keep himself safe. One time, he was out covering 100 miles to run his trap line when his snowmobile broke down 8 miles from his cabin. A snowmobile serves as a lifeline for people living in remote areas, and when it stopped working, he had to walk back home as no one would come looking for him. At least until 24 hours had passed, and he would freeze to death by then, as the temperature could drop 35 degrees below zero after nightfall. Charlie made a lot of rookie mistakes, as he left home without bringing some spare parts that could have fixed his ride, sub-zero gear, compass, and other supplies that he would need for survival. With only a headlamp, axe, and snowshoes, he headed home. It would take him around 6 hours to do that on the trail, so he took a shortcut through the woods and across the frozen lake. It was nerve-wracking, even for someone like him, as it was dark and he could hear the ice cracking. He wasn't sure of the thickness of the ice, and there was slim chance of him getting out of the icy water if he went through the ice. As much as he wanted to rush home, he had to slow down as he wanted to avoid sweating a lot, as that could lead to hypothermia. Fortunately, he made it home safely, just very exhausted. He fixed the snowmobile the following morning and proceeded to check his traps. Finding the traps empty made him a little depressed, as he needed the money. But his parents taught him to never give up and just hope for a better day. He said, "I don't need to be rich. I just want to survive." To augment his income, he and his friend Jim would look for antlers at the moose shed every year, and which could sell for up to $100 per horn. They would be lying around partly buried under the fresh snow, so he had to know where to dig by looking at the trees for signs of moose activity. Several hours passed before he found 2 shed antlers, as he said other people might have beaten him to the rest of them. Another time, Charlie was injured when he fell from his snowmobile during a high-speed chase, as he was trying to catch the guy he believed was messing with his traps. He might have forgotten to put bait in one of his traps, as he said his mind wasn't as sharp as it used to be, but some of his traps were sprung by someone else. It was a good thing that Jim was with him at that time and helped him get home. Charlie's cabin was 70 miles from the nearest hospital, so he had to wait until morning before a doctor arrived to check him out. After his arm was stabilized, he was taken to the hospital via snowmobile and was diagnosed to have a torn rotator cuff, and so was confined to his place for about a month. With his arm in a sling and not yet fully recovered, he and Jim went ice fishing. But on their way home, Charlie's snowmobile passed through cracked ice, and Jim helped him pull his ride out before it could slide fully into the icy water. He later went back to trapping, struggling along with only one good arm. Fortunately, he managed to catch a couple of beavers, although he had to skin one right then and there, despite the cold, as he couldn't carry a 45-pound weight back to his snowmobile. He also had to get blocks of ice from the frozen lake for his root cellar. But with each one weighing over 100 pounds, Jim came to help him with it. Another thing he needed to do was to get firewood while there was still snow, as it was easier to drag logs of wood across a smooth surface. But he needed to cut the wood down to smaller pieces to bring home. He made sure that all of his furs from beaver, mink, raccoons, and weasels were properly tacked, stretched, and dried to get a good price when he turned them over to the fur depot for auction at the end of his first trapping season. His earnings that time was around $5,000, which was far from his $30,000 income as a logger. He knew he had to think of better ways to get more furs and avoid sustaining injuries. It could be a relatively lucrative industry, but one has to have the experience and the skills to be more efficient in trapping animals, despite the inhospitable terrain and unforgiving weather. For the next winter season, Charlie ventured towards the Machias River Valley in search of new trapping grounds. He was hoping that since the area remained untouched, he could obtain a lot of furs, particularly beavers, as its pelt could fetch around $200 each. He built a small camp and then set his traps a mile from it. His gamble paid off, as he had luck with his traps, although he had to eliminate his competition, a coyote, which took a bite of his catch. When he had to meet with Jim to give him what he had caught so far and replenish his supplies, he miscalculated a step and slipped into the icy water thigh deep. He then had to quickly build a fire to dry his clothes and get warm, because if hypothermia sets in, he could lose consciousness in half an hour. Obviously, he survived this mishap too. However, he was caught in a sudden windstorm and had to build a shelter and fire so he wouldn't freeze to death. Later on, when he went back to his camp, he discovered that it had been partly damaged by the wind. He was pretty upset, but said, "You gotta have the hard to have the good," and didn't let it bring him down. Just when fans thought Charlie was getting the hang of being a fur trapper, he left the show after season 3. His fans were disappointed, as they were looking forward to seeing his progress each trapping season, although they couldn't blame him, considering all the mishaps that had happened when running his trap line. There were those who couldn't help but wonder if a series of bad luck or close calls were real or a reenactment, as it was said that in reality shows, the cast was oftentimes asked to do things which emphasize the danger of a particular lifestyle, or simply for more interesting content. However, some people chalked it up to Charlie being new at this game, or to the pressure of being on television and wanting to give it his all. Admittedly, he pushed his luck all the time, living on the edge and being his own worst enemy, which probably accounted for some situations he found himself in that could have been avoided. Although he might love the woods, the lifestyle might not be for him. According to some reports, he ventured into a new business, perhaps finding something that pays well and isn't as dangerous. Still, others couldn't accept that he quit the game, as he once said that trapping and shed hunting, being outdoors on the sled, is doing what I like. If I can't do that, I don't want to exist anymore. He said that he was stubborn and wanted to keep trying despite all the setbacks because he loved this way of life. He added that if a person loses a drive in life, he might as well roll over and die. Charlie might no longer be on television, but there are those who believe that he's still living as a mountain man. Thank you for spending some time with us. Make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss another video. We also handpick these videos which we recommend you watch next. You can talk to us on all social medias or ask a question in the comments below. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you back tomorrow.